What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 more games with unsatisfying endings. Right at the beginning here, spoilers, obviously. I will have the video time-stamped, and if you're curious what titles I'll be spoiling, I'll put them down in the description below as well, so as not to ruin the surprise if you just want to watch this blind, but if you do want to watch out for spoilers, the list is in the description, or you can check the chapters. Moreover, I want to specify that while these endings are pretty unsatisfying, I don't think they're bad games by any means. I just find the endings to be generally disappointing in some way or another, which we'll obviously talk about. And last but not least, if the title wasn't a clue for you, I did make one of these videos previously. However, I actually made that video right as I was starting to play Mass Effect 3 for the first time, and it was well known to me that the endings were generally considered poor. And combine that with the fact that I already had several other games with this kind of thing in mind, and here we are. Now, if it wasn't obvious, the very first title on our list is Mass Effect 3, which I just recently completed, and I'll have the review out soon enough, probably here in a couple days as I wrap up a few other things. But it's no secret that Mass Effect 3, or the Mass Effect trilogy, really has disappointing endings, and I would say generally that's true. However, I don't think they're bad. I just think they're very underwhelming for a combination of 2 reasons. One, most of the choices you made throughout the trilogy don't factor in very much to the endings. In total, if you want to get specific with the extended cut, there's like 8 variations of the 3 main endings, or 7 rather, and then 1 secret ending. And the secret ending is the cycle just continues, so that's kind of boring. But all of those endings and which one you get is basically decided by which ending you choose right at the end, which is available to you depending on the war assets you managed to gain as you were playing through the title, which is affected a little bit by your choices previously, but the limit is so low that it doesn't really matter. You can just play Mass Effect 3 and still get all of the choices available. So disappointing because none of your choices really factored into this. 2, some of the endings actively invalidate whole swaths of your choices up to that point. For instance, the Destroy ending, which is considered the best, and I would agree, still sees all synthetic life wiped out, which means if you spent the time to unite the Quarian and the Geth, or if you spent a lot of time with EDI, etc., or just any kind of synthetic life, you basically wasted your time because the best ending of the game, broad opinion-wise, completely destroys that. And if you want to avoid that, the other endings see the Reapers still alive, which is also disappointing. So it's just a real mixed bag in terms of satisfaction when it comes to Mass Effect 3's endings. But again, I don't think they're necessarily bad, just disappointing. But that brings us to our next title, and it is Cyberpunk 2077. Obviously, this game had a notoriously poor launch. I played it on PC though, so I avoided most of that. However, there were a lot of recurring bugs, yes. But that is not what I personally found disappointing about Cyberpunk 2077. On PC, I was able to look past those things. No, what I found disappointing about Cyberpunk 2077 were the endings. They were just all quite unsatisfying, with the exception of leaving Night City with Pan Am and the Nomads. I actually liked that one quite a lot. However, all of the other endings see V, our main character, with either 6 months to live or just straight up dead, or potentially even a suicide, and they're all just various shades of depressing. And it's a pretty big bummer, to be honest. However, again, there is the one exception. If you leave Night City with Pan Am and the Nomads, you get this really cool cutscene that I was a big fan of, actually, which is pretty much the only ending of that game that I liked, and even it comes with its own drawbacks. So unlike a lot of people, the worst part of Cyberpunk 2077 for me was actually the endings. And that brings us to number 3 on our list, and that is Fallout 4. Now, I've talked about Fallout 4 here and there on the channel, but generally my opinion is that the gameplay is pretty good. It's not the best RPG in the world, but it's fun to play. I even enjoy a lot of the interplay with some of the factions. However, despite what faction you end up with or choose to side with, all of the endings play out basically the same way. You either side with the Institute and kind of wind up disabling everyone else, or you side with the faction and end up nuking the Institute and having various relationships with the other factions. And that's pretty much what it boils down to every time. It's just a slight reskin of the same mission in a lot of cases, down to the difference of it just being who you're talking to. And then unlike previous Fallouts, there's not a whole lot in the insides about like what happens to areas, about the quest decisions you made up to that point, which kind of adds to the culmination of just And I wish they had fleshed the endings out quite a bit more than they did. But that brings us to number 4 on our list, and it is Elex 2. Now, if you watch the channel, I have reviewed both Elex and Elex 2, and I really liked the first Elex. I thought the ending was cool. It left on this cliffhanger of the huge event of the aliens coming down, and you have been trying to prepare for them. And then in Elex 2, we actually see that fight come to fruition. However, it ends much the same way, in that now we're just waiting for more aliens to show up. And it's just like, come on, man. They very clearly set it up with a trilogy in mind, because that's just common for what Piranha Bytes, the developer, does. They make a lot of trilogies, so I'm fully expecting a third title. But as the second entry, it just didn't feel like they expanded the game enough, and the ending was left very underwhelming as a result. It didn't even feel like a conclusion, really. It was just very disappointing, and your son technically dies, and like nobody seems to care about that. It was just very strange all around. Left me pretty underwhelmed. And that, of course, brings us to the final entry on our list, and it is none other than Tyranny, one of the kings of unsatisfying endings. For a variety of reasons, I think the reason for this one would change depending on who you asked, but originally, when the game launched, the endings were a bit underbaked. With some patches and some DLC, the endings did get fleshed out a little bit more. However, my problem isn't so much with the content of the endings itself, but rather how sudden it is. You see, Tyranny ends like right as your character is coming into their own power-wise. In Tyranny, you spend a lot of the game hearing about this essentially immortal, all-powerful dictator known as Kairos, who does all these heinous things and is definitely not a good person. And you can choose to fight that person, or you can choose to just straight up side with them, actually, which is a very valid ending, as technically you're a member of Kairos' army when you come to the area of the game. But you get all this information revealed, and that your character manages to have some semblance of the power Kairos does, which they use to rule, and you just find all this out, your character just builds up to this, and then that's it, game over. And the game ends just like right when the plot picked up, and it was like, okay, now there's this thing we gotta go do, but you don't ever get to go do it because the game ends, and it's very kind of frustrating, especially because it kind of feels like the ending comes out of nowhere. And you combine that with the fact that a Tyranny sequel is incredibly unlikely. We will likely never actually know what happens next, or can even decide what happens next, depending on all the choices you made, because the game itself can end one of quite a few ways. But there you guys go, 5 more games with unsatisfying endings. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know about games you either enjoyed the ending of, or perhaps other games I haven't mentioned that have disappointed you. Do try to keep the comments spoiler free though. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.